Wow.
Huh.
That's different too. Okay, well, welcome to our 11th in a series of Country Squire meetings. When 2020 started, it was a year that almost wasn't. As you all know, we had our last in-person meeting last January, and there were 6 months with no meetings whatsoever. And then we started our first one in August of last year. Now, I don't know why I've got a screen up here that says launch meeting. and how
Yeah,
I-
we're all seeing that. I'm seeing that too.
Yes, somebody, Bruce started to share his screen for some reason. So,
Bruce, unshare your screen. Oh, I don't know how I
or
see-
you can do that as host too, Joe. You can just hit stop sharing down in the bottom. Towards the right, you should be able to see something.
I say share screen.
Yep, if you click on that, there should be a menu there.
Yeah, this will stop other screen sharing. Do you want to
Yep.
continue?
Yep,
Now I've got. Now let me try that again. Oh, boy. This will stop other screen sharing. Do you want to continue? And I said, yes. And that's what I get. Can you see that, Bill?
no, I still see the screen sharing going on.
You have to, is it,
Maybe you should have clicked no.
There we go.
Now we have Star Island. So we're seeing your screen, Joe. We're closer.
Better.
it's only 7 miles out?
Yeah, it's only 7 miles out. That's Star Island. Let me, I got, now I said Zoom. I got a big Zoom sign. It said,
What is that?
boy, this has never happened before. It's always a new adventure. End meeting for all.
No, don't do that.
I think so.
Trying to do now.
I want to get back to a screen for the meeting.
So click on share screen at the bottom of the page, Joe.
I don't have a page anymore.
No, it's still down there at the bottom. It should be anyway.
Nope.
No.
Is it at the bottom there?
And I've got people in the waiting room as well.
Look on up there. See, I can't see it.
It says show grid video.
Hit unmute. Or
Yeah, good point.
I don't even see that.
Could I just try it for a minute?
Yeah. Interesting.
oh, Rosie the Riveter.
Yes. I have a vaccine button that says we did it. Okay, let's see.
This is her computer. That's the other thing. I use an
That's the-
iPad
yeah,
and then
that's-
normally.
Yes.
Does anybody recognize that screen as their regular home screen? They're the ones that are sharing it.
Now this is Joe's now. Maybe click the Zoom camera to bring you back to Zoom. There you go.
And it says sign in or join a meeting, hit join a meeting or what?
No, that's not right.
We don't have the options anymore. That's what.
Somebody's screen. Do they recognize this stuff on their screen? Is it them, whoever it is?
I reckon that's Star Island.
But
But that's on my screen, a backdrop, but we can't seem to get back to the, what about stop, you are screen sharing. Oh, there it is,
There we got it.
up at the top.
Now.
Well, somebody should recognize it.
No,
Yeah,
I'm-
they're unique pictures for these people. It's their home screen that we're looking at.
yeah, we must be on mute.
Now we can hear you.
It's my home screen, and that's Star Island, part of the Isle of
I
Shoals.
can't think.
He's probably got it as the background. Maybe go up and change your background to none.
Can we just hit up here again?
You were close to it. If you saw stop sharing, that's what you want to do.
Okay, stop share. Hit that.
Yep. What do you know about that?
Aha.
Brilliant.
And we have, I'm sorry, one last thing, I want to get the participants. This is all being recorded. That's really great. This is great. Okay, I'm okay there. I think I've got everybody in that was waiting in the waiting room.
31 people. Now, whoops, I'll
Ah,
take this off.
Okay. So I'm just gonna launch into this now. Mark, are you there?
I'm here.
So Mark Friedman has agreed to give us our words of inspiration, and then hopefully we'll be back on track here.
Yeah, I think at this point, we could all use some words of inspiration. Inspire means to invigorate, animate, stir up, arouse. It also means to breathe in. So what inspires me? Acts of kindness, elegant ideas, true love, people who are good personal examples, the wonders of nature, good fellowship. All of us should take a moment each day of our lives to take a deep breath in and think of all the things that inspire us.
Boy, thanks a lot, Mark. That was great. I asked Mark if he would be willing to give us these words of inspiration, and he said it was a little out of his comfort zone. But that was well done. Thank you. So I would like to have Bill Helm. Are you here? Bill,
Bill is
I'm
muted.
here.
I'm here.
would you like to introduce? We have two guests today. And Bill, if you'd like to go first to introduce your guest.
I would. I'm delighted to introduce Dick Munn, a friend of mine here in New London, who's a graduate of Yale and the Harvard Business School. And early in his life, Dick was an air intelligence officer in the Pacific Fleet with the Navy. Then he went on to a career with IBM, Xerox, and Digital Equipment, where incidentally, Dick and I worked at the same time, but we didn't know each other then. And then he started as an industry analyst for focused on high-tech services that was acquired by a division of Dun & Bradstreet. Then he started a somewhat similar business with his son, who has run it for the past 20 years. Dick and his good wife, Holly, moved to New London in 1967. They now live in Highland Ridge. And Dick, along the way, has served as a trustee at Colby Sawyer College, as well as on the board of governors of Baker Hill Golf Club. Dick and Holly have just recently sold their winter home in Florida and are now here as full-time residents. So I'm delighted that Dick's with us today.
Welcome, Dick. Would you like to say hello?
Hi, Wayne French, I know from a church in Montclair, New Jersey, many, many years ago. And so a number of people I see that I do recognize. So I'm pleased to join you today. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I have a guest myself today, and you've heard him kind of help me, or at least attempt to help me early on. His name is Bill Mattson, who retired in 2016 as a senior vice president of human resources of Analog Devices, a Boston-based semiconductor company with $4 billion in annual revenues, employing over 10,000 employees in over 20 countries around the world. He served as executive officer and teamed with other senior leaders to set the strategic direction for the business. Prior to joining Analog Devices, Bill was chief human resource officer for Lenovo, helping them establish their global footprint after the acquisition of IBM's PC business. He spent the first 25 years of his career at IBM. His roles there included the development of a new line of business that established IBM as a source of HR outsourcing and transformation services for external clients. He also spent 4 years living in Tokyo, Japan, as a head of HR for IBM's Asian operations. Bill graduated from Cornell University with a degree in industrial and labor relations. He serves on the National Board of Directors for Cradles to Crayons, where he chairs their HR committee and serves on the Nominating and Governance Committee. He also is on the board of Eastman Community Association, where he serves as president. Bill and his wife, Donna, live in Eastman. They have 3 grandsons living in Milwaukee and Rochester, New York, where their parents, Bill and Donna's children, call home. I've had the pleasure of working with Donna on the Eastman Charitable Foundation, and Bill is also part of the ski posse. He also enjoys golf, which isn't part of his resume. So welcome, Bill. Would you like to say hello?
Well, thanks, Joe, for the warm and kind words. I'm here today because Joe rescued me off from Mount Sunapee a couple months back when it was icy and I was having a tough time finding my way down the mountain. I know many of you from Eastman and have seen the rest of you working your way into the center. Hopefully we'll be able to see folks doing that again soon. And delighted to be able to spend some time with you today. You're on mute, Joe.
Thanks, Bill. That happens automatically sometimes. Last month, you may recall that Jim Prevost introduced John Fink in the way the process goes, having no objections, of course. He is now our newest member. So again, we met him last week. I don't know if you're here this week, John, or not, but if you are, you could say a quick hello. If not, he is our newest member. And if the 2 guests today decide to join, it will have been since our last meeting in person that we have added 22 new members, which I think is kind of remarkable considering we had 6 months with no meetings whatsoever. And the conditions under which we're operating, which you're all witness to today. I do want to give a little update. I met with the proprietors of Forbes Tavern, and we are going to shoot for our first in-person meeting in August. There was a consideration of July, but the following day is kind of a big event for them, the Prouty. And we decided it'd be best for all parties if we said, well, let's shoot for August. There are still some things that need to be ironed out, however. Currently, there's a mask mandate in the center. Also, there's some sort of a staffing issue. So whether it's going to be by buffet or plated is another thing we'll have to wait and see. I discussed some finances with them, and at this time, I guess I don't want to really get into whether it's mandatory that we're all vaccinated. I'm assuming we all are, or whether we'll have to show proof of that or they aren't requiring that, but whether our organization will, so that we may be able to represent to them that indeed we are all vaccinated in that particular Draper room, and we'll be the only ones in there, which by August may or may not give us a little more leeway. So it's still a thing in progress, but it looks like we're probably only going to have to suffer through one more of these events with myself, one more meeting, unless things change. And I don't know if you have an update on that, Bill, or not, or if that's in concert with some of your thinking.
No, the mask mandate actually is being lifted this Friday, so that's public knowledge.
Okay.
The rest of it is exactly as you described.
Okay. Well, great. So again, you can see we are progressing rapidly in that direction. So now I'd like to introduce Morris, if you will. Morris, who will be introducing our speaker today.
How about Art Rosen?
Thanks, Joe. Good afternoon, everyone. Am I coming across okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, good. Okay. Well, it's my pleasure today, great pleasure to welcome our guest speaker, our good friend John Ferries, who joins us from his new home in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. So welcome, John. I'm glad you could join us.
Thank you. Pleased to be here, Morris. A lot of
Good.
friends.
Yeah, thank you. Well, John's topic, I can't imagine it being more timely. It is what should US policy be towards an increasingly assertive and aggressive China? And I can't think of anyone better qualified than John, because he has witnessed firsthand China's rise to become a global superpower, because he traveled to China 40 times as president of international operations for a global communications company to help their clients there deal with the Chinese government and to do business there. John also led a team working with the Chinese government to secure the rights to the 2000 Summer Olympic Games. So John is well versed in with the Chinese government and business, and he still tracks developments there through Chinese websites and other media, and through his contacts there. And so he knows that President Xi Jinping has said that it's Chinese destiny to replace the US as the world's greatest superpower. So, John, what should we do about that?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. And I want to say this topic of what the US foreign policy ought to be in regard to China is on the minds of people around the world, but particularly all the people running the countries in Asia, because a lot of the focus here is indeed on what they're doing to become the primary superpower, or to be even a greater superpower in Asia. Now, one of the things you'll see in my remarks is that in many ways, this is a classic example of the law of unintended consequences, because we have basically helped to make and to facilitate China's rise to its current superpower status. And I will explain that as I go through. Now we're taking second thoughts, but let's start and follow along. What I want to start with is to put this in some historical context, because that's exactly what's in the mind today of both Xi Jinping and also the people of China and the leaders of China as they formulate their foreign policy. It starts back in about 1835 and is what they call the century of humiliation. Almost 100 years of China's humiliation by foreign powers. At that time, 1835, China was an agrarian country, mainly peasants and farmers. It was basically everybody living on their own little plot of ground. And it was a country that basically was just there and nobody had much interest in it. It had an empire there. And the last one was the Xi'an Empire, but it had others that preceded it. But mainly it was basically a peasant country. And as a result, when it began to be discovered, the foreign powers came a calling. They included the United States, Britain, Germany, Japan. They all came with an idea of finding out what in China they could grab, what values they may find, and to gain some influence in this vast country of, at that time, 1.2 billion people. So what happened in this century because of these invaders were two opium wars, one war called the Sino-Japanese War, and also the Boxer Rebellion. All of these were wars fought, instigated by the foreign power. The farmers and peasants had no chance whatsoever. They were basically using their shovels and rakes to defend themselves, and they were quickly subjugated. And the foreign powers then met to kind of carve up the reparations from their effort. So in 1842, at the end of the First Opium War, among the reparations negotiated in the Treaty of Nanking was the fact that now a piece of China called Hong Kong would forever be bequeathed to Great Britain, one of the main parties in that war. So they got Hong Kong this way. All the papers were signed, and they were officially ceded and became part of Great Britain. Later, in 1883, China was forced after yet another war to give up another piece of land, this time Macau. Macau was given to Portugal at that time. And then in 1895, after the Sino-Japanese War, China in the reparations was forced to give up yet another piece of their land, as well as allowing Japanese troops to stay in Chinese territory, as well as paying no taxes to China while they were there. But they had to give up a piece of land that they had owned for centuries and called Taiwan. And that's how Taiwan came into Japanese hands. It was formerly called Formosa, and Japan had Taiwan from that period, 1895, until 1945, when they lost it as a reparation of the Second World War. It came back to bite them, but they had it for all that time. Anyway, China considered these acts of foreign powers and the fact that they could not retaliate, they were overrun, as humiliating acts. And in some of Xi Jinping's most stirring lectures that he gives to the people and to the Politburo, he recites the humiliations they've been through and that they will never, ever, ever again be humiliated on the world stage. And they also require the century of humiliation to be a required course for every single student in the Chinese school system. So they're all growing up knowing what had happened and therefore vowing that it won't happen again. Now, what happened after that humiliating century, when finally it ended with the Qing, the last remnants being driven out by Sun Yat-sen, China finally became in charge of itself. At that time, Sun Yat-sen was part of a political party called the Kuomintang, and its leader was Chiang Kai-shek. And so from the time after the century ended and China had its own destiny in its own hands, Chiang Kai-shek was the leader. But 3 years later, a group of people led by Mao Zedong decided they wanted to take over. And so they had a civil war. It went on for a number of years. We all know the outcome, because the outcome really was in 1947, the Chiang's forces were finally driven out, and sure enough, they took the boats across to Taiwan. And at that point, Japan had lost it. It had been a kind of a neutral piece of property, and they just encamped there. Okay, now from that point on, and by the way, Chiang Kai-shek was backed by the US, so our US foreign policy was to keep him in power. But that was the last time that we opposed the current leadership of China. After that, after Mao won, in 1971, eventually, the UN decided to add China to its membership and also to majorly replace, and the UN, but with the US consent, because everyone on the Security Council had to vote in favor, to replace Taiwan, who had served on the Security Council for many years, with Mao's China. So the US helped to give to Mao the power of being on that Security Council, a major, huge, huge defining moment in these relations. And China and Taiwan was then not only taken off the Security Council, but delisted and no longer even recognized by the UN. We'll get to Taiwan in a few moments. Now let's go on. The US continues. That was 71. In 72, we had that historic trip of Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger to visit Mao in China, followed by the US ping pong team, you'll recall. So there they went, and that's a huge defining moment again of China's American support for China. And that was the decoupling of America really at that time from Russia, instead realigning with China. Then Mao died in 1979, and Deng Xiaoping replaced him as president. The first thing that happened is that Jimmy Carter invited him to come to the United States. And here's this fellow whose age is 77. He's taking over a country that's on the rocks. Its most gifted people, all the cultural people, all the people that were running the government, all the people that had anything to do with education, teaching. The Cultural Revolution had wiped them all out under Mao's leadership. So he had a country that was really flattened out. You hear about equality in this country. They had equality at the time he took it over. But he went to the West. He visited the United States. He got an honorary degree at Temple University. He went to steel mills of the US. He saw for the first time the technology in action, his very first microwave oven. He'd never seen such a thing, and he marveled at it. He went to Houston and saw the oil and how that industry had developed. He went to many different factories. When he came back, he brought with him about 25 leaders of government as well. When they came back, he made a prophetic thing, because at that time, 90% of his country was uneducated. 90% of them were below the poverty line. Everything was rusting, and whether it was an existing building or a bridge or a port, things were in terrible shape. And so he came back and he made this quote. He said, if you want to plan out 1 year, plant a seed. If you want to plan out 10 years, plant a tree. If you want to plan out 100 years, educate the people. What a remarkable, incisive view of what he needed to do. And he started immediately, and he had some great success. That's another topic. But nonetheless, he, with that Western trip, really decided, and the head people in the Politburo decided, backing him, that they were going to transform China. And the rest is history. After 1980, when he did his visit, in 81, he opened China up for business. US companies flocked there. My company flocked there. I was there. Everything opened up. They opened up. When the US came, China had open arms, but the US came as well, very grateful to have access to this market. Then that was 81. China now is growing rapidly with our help, because we gave them all these wonderful multinationals to work with. We also gave them aid. In 1989, we had Tiananmen Square, and the awful tragedy of Tiananmen Square. Instead of breaking relations or doing something like that, we imposed sanctions on China, because we kind of had to do something. And again, 2.5 years later, those sanctions are wiped away, and we're back to normal, working with China. So the US policy really had been, up to then, what they called an engagement foreign policy. They felt that by engaging China, by working with China, by helping China grow, and by helping them get involved with international institutions, they would become more democratic. They'd become more of a world player. They would become a nation that we can easily work with and probably be able to control. However, we do know that, in fact, what they did is they invited and helped the US join the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund. None of that would have been possible for China on their own. The US helped do all of those things. They helped them in forming trade pacts. They encouraged Chinese students to come study in America. Up till now, last year, 250,000 Chinese students are studying in American colleges and universities. We did everything we could to ramp up our support and encouragement of China's growth. And in 2003, as I chronicle this, in 2003, China implemented their going global policy, which was a statement that in order to to have enough raw materials for their huge manufacturing, they needed to do deals around the world with Africa, Latin America, other regions to get raw materials, and in turn, to help build their infrastructure so that trade between China and them could proceed. That meant totally rebuilding their ports, their mines, their train tracks going to and from the ports and mines, their roads, their bridges, their hydroelectric dams, everything was part of that. So going global got China really deeply into the Latin America. In fact, a heavier influence now, I think, than America is in our own backyard, Latin America, a subject of another course. They also right now are known to they've kind of eaten our lunch in Africa. They've gotten a lot of raw materials and they have almost no competition. They back all 54 countries and the leaders of them, many of them real cowboys. And they have a major influence in Africa and in Euro-Asia. Why is that important? Well, because when you are in the General Assembly and other major international organizations and you have a vote, and you can count on 54 nations of Africa and 25 of Latin America and keep naming them, you've got support, a quid pro quo for working with them in raping them of their raw materials, but also rebuilding their infrastructure. So they did all that. And now, as we know, they are implementing a new initiative, the Belt and Road Initiative, to extend all the way into Europe and all the way down into Latin America in order to kind of secure their supply chains and everything else, but also to give to those countries along the way opportunities for infrastructure development so they can tie into the basic strategy of the Belt and Road. And this is what's happening right now. Over 120 countries have signed in. Some have already put up money as they're part of the deal. China's putting up money in those countries as well right now, and it's continuing. That's the Belt and Road Initiative. We had thought as China would grow and rural people would be brought out of the rural class and brought into the middle class, that would really help because they would be more knowledgeable. They would be able to take a more active role in making China more open, more democratic. Well, 500 million people of the 1.2 billion were brought into the middle class in 15 years. 500 million. Did that change things for the government's policies? Not at all. It was terrific because it was a more skilled workforce. Now the education and those who are literate was up to 70-some% from 10%. They had the schooling. Remember, if you wanted to plan out 100 years, you educate the public. Well, it was working, but it didn't work the way we had thought it might. And so all of this helping of China getting to its then status was something that we had made possible. In addition, though, we had some wake-up calls. Most recent, and they're pretty clear. One was cyber. China was ripping us apart, our weapons suppliers apart, by getting plans for all kinds of military hardware, airplanes, submarines, all of our stealth technology, all of other weapon technology and ballistic missile and intermediate missile technology. Much of it was obtained through stealth. Had they had to do it on their own, they'd be another 20 years of development, but instead they could get it in a week. And they did. And when you look at their military systems, and if I put our most advanced stealth jet on one half the screen and theirs on the other screen, you could almost see an identical airplane because they simply copied that technology. The same for stealth submarines and the same for stealth drones. It's just that just many examples of what they were able to get. And so as a result, their military is now pretty strong. And they have a very huge military capability within Asia and a surprisingly good one in terms of intercontinental. And one of the things that they realize they have is a long coastline. And so a lot of these missiles are not permanently, but they're installed on missile launchers. The missile launchers are huge platforms on wheels and are moved around constantly by China so that we can't necessarily have our weapons all drained on them all 24/7. They hide them, they produce them, and they are very clever at how they camouflage them so that if something broke out, they believe we would not be able to destroy that capability. And meanwhile, while all this is happening, of course, China was growing in Africa, they were growing in Latin America. They were also, as we know, claiming islands way off the coast of China called out of the South China Sea and building military installations on those islands. They haven't turned them into military operations yet, but they have the capability of airfields on them. They've got harbors on them. They've got underground submarine facilities on them in case they need to use them. So what has happened? Well, we haven't done anything about Africa. We haven't done anything about Latin America. The Belt and Road, we tried to convince some nations not to join, but they all joined. In that trade pact, the Trans-Pacific Trade Pact, once America pulled out, we asked our allies to pull out. Not a single one did. They realized that China would be the replacement leader in that pact. When the Uyghurs, that group of Muslims on their western coast, were all brought into currently re-education camps, what did we do? Well, we made some statements. That's about it. Just saying, in the media picked up a story saying, do you know how badly they're being treated? And all the security cameras monitoring them 24/7. But meanwhile, all of this other stuff went on. Xi Jinping, now in power, made his famous destiny speech that Morris referred to stirringly. This is our destiny. It may not be right today, but it's our destiny, and we're on track to get there. He has been consistent. He said in his last speech to the People's Congress in China, he said, we are not a China rising, we are a risen China. And in many ways, we believe we are at par with the United States. Our total economy is going to pass them within 2 years, and it will. And that's all the projections that we have. And so, he's fanning those things. And meanwhile, what are we doing recently? In addition to not really taking a firm stand on some of the things that they're doing, we've decided to pull out of that Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership. We've decided to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord. We're back in now, but we pulled out. We decided to pull out of the Iran Nuclear Accord. We stopped funding the World Health Organization, on and on and on. And we put down a red line on Syria about gas. And when they use gas, we didn't call that a violation of the red line. And in other cases, we've been quite tepid. And a lot of the world is watching what's happening, is wondering. China certainly is rising, but what's happening to the United States? Because those are the two factors that factor into a coherent foreign policy. So we decided after all this that we should change our US foreign policy, and that it should be now maybe titled, if you'd like, Containment and Cooperation. So what was the first thing that happened? You remember we sent a Navy fleet to Asia, called it a Pivot to Asia, to monitor the scene, to show the presence of the US Navy. We began to, of course, apply tariffs to, and now some sanctions to trade between the US and China. And we did other things and we spoke out more about the Uyghurs. But basically, while we did those things, and while the Navy fleet patrolled, we didn't do anything else. We didn't go and ask them or force them to change their policies and their actions. Now, China hates containment. Containment is interference. And when, again, Xi Jinping in his speeches says very openly, they're trying to interfere in our growth, in our destiny. They are trying to hold us back. In fact, we say we're trying to, when you see some of the reports. And therefore, they are really very much opposed to any effort that smells of containing them, selfishly containing them. They call that part of humiliation. If they're contained, it's the same as being overrun by foreign powers. If they're contained, they're being humiliated. Their natural growth is being stunted. So, in cooperation, there's a lot of things we can do, and some we are doing under that policy. For the environment, China now is pledging to be carbon neutral in 2060. Pandemic, we worked together on the Ebola virus in Africa. China sent a big medical ship, and the US did likewise. We were able to cooperate to help there, and even the COVID. Both countries are now sending, vaccines to other countries, including there. We can cooperate on terrorism and on controlling that. It's in the best interests of both countries. We are cooperating on nuclear deproliferation, even though China is a little bit slow in reining in North Korea. It is still the fact that China realizes, and we realize, it's in our joint best interest to have to cooperate on not letting anybody else get involved and have nuclear weapons. We're also cooperating on things like narcotics traffic, all kinds of traffic of elephant tusks, everything you can imagine, we're cooperating on. But in the big picture, those are kind of soft areas. So what are our foreign policy currently, as I read about it from people who've left the Obama administration, particularly, and what they said is this is what the planks are of our policy that we have up until today. One is don't destabilize the Chinese government. A destabilized government who breaks up is eventually going to get a rogue into power, and all kinds of dire consequences might happen. Two, don't try to drive a wedge between the government and the people of China. Right? We initially tried to by making statements about the awful effects of internet suppression and all the things that you know about and read about. But then we kind of pulled back because we realized we're not going to win that war. And without getting into the statistic, I've been seeing research that shows that the Chinese people are very, up to the 80% level, confident of their current government and the direction it's headed and the future that they see for themselves in that direction. 80% of the people in the country, and an even higher percent of the young people in China have that authority, no matter what we think of the authoritative nature of Xi Jinping's government. Also, don't act hostile. So we have a foreign policy that says, don't be belligerent. Do it slowly, do it patiently. Fourth, do not isolate China. Don't suddenly try to get them out of the WHO or out of these trade associations, because if we isolate them, they're going to feel more emboldened to take actions, we believe, under this policy than otherwise. Whatever the next number is, we should follow the China one China policy. So don't go into anything about recognizing Taiwan. Don't even whisper it. Stick to that policy. We do want, number 7, China to respect international rules. They are generally respecting those rules, or there's a few where they're on the edges. They want, our policy is to ask China to uphold human rights. Well, we know China will or they won't, depending on the situation with the Uyghur minority or not. And finally, our policy says we have to maintain peace and prosperity in Asia. Now, that's our policy toward China today. It's a containment and cooperation policy. But as we've had already some experience with it, and as it's going to be, has been continued up until today, you have to scratch your head and wonder, is that doing anything to really take a major effect? Because China continues to go forward. They have aggressive plans in their new 5-year plan they just announced. They are very transparent on what they want, and they clearly are not going to stop. And so we're sitting there in a situation, we've built the monster. Now we figure out what do we do with what we helped build, because it begins to have some real implications for us. And all of our allies, no matter what they say, in Asia, Korea, Japan, and elsewhere, are looking to see, what does the United States do? Or are we just going to let them eventually take over because of superior power. There's two alternatives for China. Before we do something, they have to decide. They can continue what we call their role as a strategic competitor, but as a constructive strategic competitor. Not doing anything in a military sense, except those islands, but still being a competitor. Or they can become a lot more assertive. They can begin putting trade pressure on the other Asian countries and others, and on the Belt and Road Initiative. In other words, they can become a real threat. And so far, they seem to have taken the first course. And in their new 5-year plan, they're still talking about competing, and they're going to compete in different ways and under that plan. But they want definitely, if it's winning, and it appears to be winning globally, well, then there's really little change for them to become more hostile. And we haven't become more strident, and therefore we aren't calling their bluff and seeing what their reaction might be. US policy is to either continue that further, and right now, everything I'm sensing and reading, whatever the magazine might be, or online, or even reading the talks of these former State Department and Defense Department people from Obama and even the Trump administration, is that there's a huge battle going on between the hawks and the doves as to whether we ought to, under the dove direction, continue on as our policy, which is mild containment, and just try to continue forward under that and not risk getting them into a more forceful mode, or to become more aggressive. And under the hawks, Bolton was one of those before he left, but under the hawks in the current administration, there's a lot of interest in becoming more aggressive, in building up military, not only generally, but stationing it all over Asia in different countries, major missile capabilities and other things on a military front. So that they get a message that we may be far away in Asia, we the US, but our capabilities on your back step. They could do it military in Asia. They could be much more bold. We could be much more bold in the South China Sea. When we see some of the naval vessels of China going back and forth on that main South China Sea lane, and coming close to other vessels or to the islands that China claims, and we could actually confront them with a blockade and other kind of actions and say, get out of here, this is international waters and you're becoming too aggressive. On human rights, we could come out and take a stand that's a lot more forceful with sanctions if they didn't become better in human rights. Under trade pressure, they could apply it to some of their allies, Korea, Japan. China right now is, every single Asian country except Japan has a surplus in trading directly with China. And every single country, including Japan, has a bigger trade with China than they do with the US. So China has a huge weapon, leverage with these countries when it comes to trade, the jobs it creates in those countries, the revenues it creates in those countries. But we could put pressure on them and say, in the good of the future, we got to back off, you got to back off, and we've got to rein them in. So that's going on now. There's no clear outcome. Obviously, very soon, Biden, I'm sure, will be having a meeting with Xi Jinping, but I don't think that'll be resolved in any meeting like that. But all eyes are on what the next steps on what both countries will do. It's going to be also understood, and China has said this, if you ever watch I guess other people have said, we got to also do one other thing in addition to our foreign policy. We got to get our domestic house in order. Right now, we've got partisanship, which is absolutely probably draining us from any kind of good foreign policy changes, because we have parties that just refuse to vote together. We already have, our economy is in a problem, and our debt is rising rapidly. We have problems internally with racial inequality, and you know them all. But there's many people in the Biden administration who are saying, we got to get that done too. And our infrastructure is just horrible compared to China's, which is world class. So there is a push to do that. But let me finish by talking a little bit about Taiwan. Taiwan, as I mentioned, was brought back to a neutral status when Japan lost the Second World War. It became ipso facto a home of Chiang Kai-shek forces, and it remains that to this day. And U.S. had a defense treaty with Taiwan. It goes back a long time when Taiwan indeed was, when Chiang had arrived on Taiwan, and some years later, we developed a defense treaty. Anybody aggressively entering and invading your country in any form, we will come to your aid. Well, in 1979, when the Security Council substituted China and knocked out Taiwan and on the Security Council and also out of the UN, we abrogated that treaty. We ripped it up and said, obviously, we can't have that treaty any longer. We're a friend of China. We're helping to build China. And therefore, we don't have any longer a defense treaty with Taiwan. That's kind of interesting today because many people think we do, and we do have it with Japan, we have it with Korea, a mutual defense treaty, but we don't have that sort of thing with Taiwan. Now, we do continue to send weapons to Taiwan. It's a carefully calibrated effort, just like we do with Saudi Arabia in Israel's backyard. We do it also here. We don't give them the best weapons, but we give them some weapons so that they have things to defend themselves. But the biggest danger, and it's been featured in the Economist magazine, if you can see, and that's the most dangerous place in the world, if you can see this anyway, it is Taiwan. It's recognized by people, pretty much experts everywhere, that what China wants most is to get back part of its original country, Taiwan, and it's more and more feeling emboldened to do that. And now that Hong Kong, they've brought them under their wing in a much more forceful way, they're looking at Taiwan. And we're looking at Taiwan saying, if they do something to Taiwan, what's going to be our response? We don't have the treaty. If we do something militarily, and I think some of you have been a party to, we had Morris and others, we had a conversation about this in an earlier Zoom on another front. And when we've done modeling of potential wars that are in Asia and limited to Asia, at least initially, most of all those models show a clear win for China. The reason is it's already well armed totally within its country with these intermediate missiles. They have missile launchers and subs, they got submarines galore, and they've got all kinds of other weaponry. They've got now 2, and they're building 2 more aircraft carriers. They're really coming up to the US standards in all of that. And the most important thing is that war would be fought right off their coast, where all of their resources would be easily to be used, would be able to be brought forward and put into that effort. They've got almost 1.2 million army, but they've mainly sophisticated weapons. They got a lot of them, and all kinds of stealth technology. It's like if they were to fight a war in Cuba. Cuba's just off our coast. Can you imagine the advantage we would have by supplying our forces and weapons and even shooting them, from the mainland? Well, that's what they've got in Taiwan, off the Chinese coast. So it's kind of universally thought that if something broke out, China would have a big advantage. In addition, they would be, in addition to having an advantage, it would be probable that some of our Asian allies will not want to come in on such a venture, because if China wins, that could have some adverse effects for them. So that's kind of a little bit about what might happen. They call it the cross strait, the Taiwan Strait, the cross strait incident. It could be any flashpoint that could start it. We were talking again with Morris and others about what that, and Bill Helm, with what that might be. And the flashpoint could be simply a ship that inadvertently rams another ship because there's so many of them in the South China Sea, or a military vessel that's involved in that kind of a thing. It could be something that's triggered by the assassination of a leader of China. But whatever it might be, those are incidents out of your control, and all China would need is an excuse. I think a lot of us feel they're not going to unilaterally just invade Taiwan. They could, but they probably would like, in the eyes of the world, to be seen as reacting to an event. Just as Israel reacted to the recent Palestinian Hamas firing of their missiles into Israel, that provoked a well-orchestrated plan of Israel retaliation. Same thing here. There's a feeling that all China wants is an excuse to provide the military power to go in and quickly subdue Taiwan, take it over, and say we're now back to the country that we were. So it could be any of those. Some people are saying that it's up to China and Taiwan to negotiate a settlement themselves. That's easier said than done, but that does mean that maybe there's some long-range concessions that the two sides would do, including China. China's, of course, its treatment of Hong Kong is right smack dab between the eyes and on the consciousness of the people running Taiwan and the people in the country. Do we want to be treated this way? But it's clearly what China wants to do in Hong Kong to get on with life afterwards. And in their new 5-year plan, you'll see Hong Kong is a major new part of their planning. So in conclusion, we built a monster. We're now trying to, and we engaged the monster in everything world we could. So we gave them that opportunity to grow so much better and so much more completely than ever before they ever would have been able to on their own. Through cyber attacks, we've given them the technology to have the means to be a formidable power and other things. And now we're faced with what our foreign policy ought to be. And there's no right answer. It's being debated hotly. We'll see as we follow it what happens. We do know there was just a bill passed, if you noticed it, an infrastructure bill in terms of 5G and other technologies. Both parties agreed on in the House, and it was all aimed at staying up with China. And it was very clear. Biden has said on his watch twice, he said, China will never pass the US as a superpower on my watch. And what it means is that everybody in the administration and in Congress now realizes you got to reckon with China. And China is in a position it never expected to be so quickly. So I open it for questions. And if you have a point of view, please state it, because this is the time to do it before we reveal what the consensus in the White House and the Congress decide they should do. But right now it's business as usual, and China continues to motor along, and their plans in the future are to escalate even aspects of that. So that's the end, and I would really like to see if you have any questions. There's a lot to cover, but I hope I've been able to chronicle the foreign policy issues that have been stacked up in China's favor over a number of years.
Thanks, John. I mean, that was an excellent presentation. I, for one, really appreciate it. Morris, would you like to field any questions or work with John on the questions? Or
Yeah, thank you, John. That was wonderful.
Yeah,
Just an outstanding status report on where we are with China. I'm sure there are lots of questions. I've got one, if I might start off with one. You mentioned the 5-year plan, which is China's way of expressing its strategy going forward. What are the implications for the US of the most recent 5-year plan?
Well, just to mention to you, this is the 14th 5-year plan of China. It's something that the government forms. They get input from others, but the government, the Politburo, the governing group in the government, they form it. They present it to the National People's Congress. It's a done deal. They don't open it up for questions. They've done the questioning or debating themselves. And then the next thing is that they require people at the regional level and the local level to come up with all kinds of subsidiary plans that tie into this overall plan. What they've got in their new 5-year plan, and it's absolutely transparent. They announced it. The first thing is technology. They now want to become the world's leader and self-sufficient in technology. Now, in many areas of technology so far, they've been having to catch up. They've been having to buy it in terms of that technology for their own manufacturing and other things. But they want to move from a country that is dependent on manufacturing to a country that's a global leader in technology. And they define technology as semiconductors, artificial intelligence, robots, aerospace technology, neuroscience, telecommunications. They already have that with Huawei and the 5G, but they want all those areas. They want to have the leadership position. And the second of those is that they want to develop mega economic regions, 5 mega regions. And they've decided to combine already, they've got about 30 important cities that do different things, but they're going to now have 5 regions. One is going to be the Bay region, and that's the most interesting because it's a new one. It's going to be comprised of Hong Kong, of Sichuan, of Guangzhou, of all the cities right around and near Hong Kong. And that's where they're going to base and focus all their technology development. And they're going to have probably a huge, they're already building infrastructure for it. And they're building access, high-speed rail, everything, access of materials and people and so forth. They're going to move 100 million people into this region from the rural area. 100 million people are going to come in and add to the people already there in order to have a huge, huge resource. And when China talks big, beware, they really talk big and they usually deliver. So they're going to have those regions. In all, they're going to move 220 million people from rural to urban areas, 100 million to this one, and 120 to the others. They're going to go from a country that's currently 60% urban to 75% urban. So those two are 2 planks of their new 5-year plan, both gained at becoming the world's technology leader. You'll recall when we were growing up, we bought transistor radios and things like that from good old Japan, cheap but good looking, workable things. And eventually Japan went up the technology ladder and didn't worry about making those things anymore. The same for Korea. Well, that's what China wants to do. And they're willing to put in billions, maybe $1 trillion or 2 into funding just this technology component, which is one that you can depend on and will also make them self-sufficient. A third is reducing carbon emissions. I mentioned the target is by 2060, and that's going to be done through, already they're the world's biggest user of wind and solar power, but they're going to do a lot with electric vehicles. The fourth is they're in the rural areas that remain, they're going to give to the farmers the very latest equipment, compliments of the government, beautiful, huge tractors, all kinds of storage facilities, all kinds of mining and farming facilities so that they can become a yet more productive farming resource for now 1.4 billion people. And so they're going to get a lot of help. They're also diverting water in a series of upstream irrigation systems where they take water and they actually move it upstream into some of these areas so that that component is part of the new focus on farming as well. The next area is universal public services. They have, as you have all read, they have a growing senior population, a huge growing senior population, and the young people aren't growing at the same amount. And they've just loosened the 2-child policy to become a 3-child policy now, but they don't have enough young people to support the older group. The older group also aren't buying things domestically. they're buying it. What are they doing with their money? The older group over the years, their money is all being placed under the mattress. They don't dare put it anywhere else because they have to provide for their own future. Well, under this new 5-year plan, China's going to spend hundreds of millions, billions on new public services, a whole new pension plan, which will be free and guaranteed to every single senior citizen. And they hope that this will help them to decide when they have that plan that maybe they'll spend a little, that will contribute to domestic consumption. And so that's a plank. And finally, financial in their plan is they want to make their currency, the RMB, the renminbi currency, to become the currency throughout Asia and in the Belt and Road countries and all the projects associated with them. Right now, the dollar is king, and the RMB is used in some transactions in Asia, but they want the ability to have that done in that fashion. So that's the 5 planks that they're going to do, and they're going to do it with gusto and with a lot of money, and they don't have any drains in terms of wars in Iraq or Afghanistan to hold them back. And they have a lot of money from the run-up they've had in the last 30 years. Long answer to you, Morris, but technology is probably the area that we and the US, I'm sorry, the US and China are going to be competing the most in the next years.
Yeah. Wow. Charles Martin, you have a question?
Yes, I do. Very interesting talk. One of the things you didn't really talk about is environmental issues. All this change in China must be creating tremendous environmental strain. Could you talk to that?
It has. When we've been in China, when Donna and I have both been in China, all you have to be is on the Yangtze River, and there's smoke coming out of both sides with big, huge manufacturing plants. We all know that. We see the people in Beijing wearing masks. Those pictures are vivid to us. There's no question that they were emitting that. That the coal coming down the Yangtze was barge after barge after barge, and it was an environmental disaster. It was important for them, though, to be able to produce the manufacturing, the products that they did. Now they're pulling back on that. As I say, they have a goal in 2060 of being neutral in terms of their carbon emissions. They already have a lot of projects in effect to try to do that. They're converting some plants to cleaner energy. They got a long ways to go. Their best bet is probably to just simply stop production from a number of those plants. They are looking at electrical vehicles, and they're ramping up yet further their use of solar and wind power. It's still an issue. It will be an issue. They're still what they call, and they get away with this, they're a developing country. And they keep using those words, we're a developing country. Well, yeah, they are a developing country, but they're pretty damn big for being a developing country. And they are, but they get away being a developing country so far. They get away with environmental things, along with a few African countries and some others in Latin America. They get away with the ability to pollute, at least for some more years, and their targets are further stretched out than are the more advanced world. But they're working on that. And if it's one of their 5-year plan elements, I know they're putting in their metrics along the way to see that they're achieving, after 1 year, 2 year, their targets that'll be all part of their progress. And again, at the local level, they're asking their people to develop plans and to put into effect the building of more nuclear facilities, more clean energy, and on and on. So that's the best answer I can give you to where they stand.
Thank you, John. John Fink, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, John, so much for your expertise. Is Hong Kong just a matter of time before it becomes completely subsumed into China's next 5-year plan? And what's the fate of Hong Kong?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that there's a date set out there. It's still another 10 years or so before, 15 years before China can actually just grab it and put it into every single facet of their current mainland China rules and regulations. However, they've advanced this now. One of their new laws is that they now have more seats in the Congress. They already have a majority. Now they have a super majority. And there's no question that they're going to get their way in Hong Kong. By bringing Hong Kong into this huge new 5-year plan, they're also going to be further bringing them into the projects that they're working on and maybe helping them in some fashion with technology jobs and so forth. But there's no question that that's done. It's a done deal. The rest is just going to go through the motions. They can live with what they have now, because as long as Hong Kong can be a part, along with Guangzhou and others of that new super center, they can live with just buying Western products over there and walking down the shoreline and having fun. But I think they don't need necessarily to just impose everything, at least right away. They've got what they need already.
Thank you.
Robert Stanley, you were next with your hands up. You'll need to, okay, there you go.
John, wonderful presentation. My question is, how does a dysfunctional democracy like ours compete with a system whereby a dozen or so men sit around a table and make decisions that are not contested by the people?
Well, initially, you remember going back in time, and we made the statement that when we became a superpower, and the world endorsed the statement, we wanted the world to become democratic. We wanted human rights to flourish. We wanted all the voices to be heard within a governmental system. A number of those nations already had it, Europe and others, but we wanted the world to have that. And that became a key part of our foreign policy, was to democratize and deal with democratic governments. The reason they fell behind we fell behind in Africa, we refused to work with governments that were run by dictators. Same in Latin America. And so, whereas China works with everyone and doesn't interfere with their local politics. So our policy going forward has been to continue to either work with them, or like in the case of Iraq, and it's kind of a joke when you read the news in Iraq, we've said all along the end game was going to be a democratic Iraq. And you look at the warlords and the Taliban, it's just being overrun. It'll become right back to where it started, I think. Certainly very close. And just like Libya, once Gaddafi went, warlords, and it's been broken into pieces as well. So I think the thought of democracies being something that's inevitable and that we can enforce and help build is false. But you're right about the backside of that is we work twice as hard. It's very difficult to get things through. We might have the will here, but we don't have the will there. We're our worst enemies. We have said we wanted a high-speed rail line between San Francisco and Los Angeles. That was 25 years ago. Every year it's brought up, and even now in infrastructure bills brought up. Well, by this point, 25,000 miles of high-speed rail has been built in China because they can just do it. Get out of our way, they say to the people, we're coming in 3 months. I think it's a time for us to reckon with the fact that we have a different policy, a different government, a different way of working. It's not necessarily the most effective. Certainly, we're now pretty even with China, who's proving that you can have a socialist or communist single party government, and it can also be damned effective, surprisingly effective, because it can do those things without zoning boards of appeal and without all the other environmental impact statements and wetlands provisions and all of that affect decision making. And I mean it's one of those things that we've come to realize, and I think we're not going to change our system, but it's holding us back with some handcuffs when we're now trying to compete with the other superpower that we helped to create.
Bob Lyon, you have a question? Maybe this should be the last question.
Hi, John. Thanks for doing
Bob.
that. It was a great presentation. Great to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Thank you. Just a quick, your thoughts on China's relationship or lack thereof with North Korea and how that might play into what's happening.
Well, the official China policy on North Korea has been pretty similar for a number of years, and that is They do not want the West to be on their border along the Korean-China border. They want North Korea to be a buffer there on that border. Now, obviously, with the current guy in charge, it's a more militant North Korea. Remember, China came to North Korea's aid in the Korean War, and they did so because they wanted, and they kept with the Panmunjom settlement, they kept the same buffer in place that had been in place. So they want North Korea. They are still probably subtly supplying some much needed food and supplies. I'm not sure how they're doing that, but they're probably doing that. We keep talking with them about, you're the one with the most influence over Kim Il-jung. Can you just sit down with him and say, if you don't go along with some of these non-proliferation demands, we're going to have to cut out even the stuff we're doing with you. And China says they'll do it, but no one knows if they've really effectively done it. So it's one of those situations. China wants to keep North Korea in place. They don't want to come down too hard. They don't want them to have the nuclear bomb. But other than that, they're just biding their time, kind of worrying about other things that are in Asia that also affect particularly the South China Sea.
Thank you, John.
John, thank you so much. That's just a wonderful presentation. And thank you to Zoom for allowing us to share your experience and wisdom.
Well, it's been a joy to have been, having been there many times and seeing it. It's a lot more fun doing that and following up on a country that's as important as China. What if I'd gone to Ecuador, 20, 50, 40 times? What if you would have had an audience of my wife and my daughter?
Well, give our best to Donna. I hope that you enjoy your new home, and I hope that we'll see a lot of you going forward.
Yeah, I hope so too. I hope by Zoom or any other means. Thanks a lot, all of you, and it's great to see your faces.
Joe, do you want to say a few words?
Yes, thanks again, John. Really appreciate your time. It's a great presentation. I'd like to, in closing, just call on Art Rosen, tell us what our next meeting is going to be all about. Art?
All right, thank you. I think we're on.
Yes, you are.
All right, what I see is John Ferries on the wide screen, but that's fine. I don't mind looking at John while I speak. We have a very different session next month. Some of you may remember Dr. Jeremy De Silva. He spoke with us in 2017. He is Associate Professor of Anthropology at Dartmouth. Since speaking with us, he has written a book. The title is What Darwin Got Right and Wrong About Human Evolution. And that will be his subject next month. What Darwin, I want to say Dartmouth, unfortunately, what Darwin got right and wrong about human evolution. Should be a very interesting session. Back to you.
Yep, thanks, Art. Well, unless there's any other business, I'll conclude with one thought. Remember that this meeting has been recorded, and while we really struggled initially, you can forward these things. I will put out the link if you wish to do so, because again, it's just a great presentation, and you may know others that might enjoy seeing it. So with that, I will close and everybody.
Who is the leader? Joe Watt. Joe Watt is Brenda's husband. Yeah.